Kemi Badenoch today says that she wants to be different to Farage, and one wonders what that difference might be. Is this a political gamble or an inevitable failure? Kemi Badenoch, the embattled leader of the Conservative Party, who I will put up an analysis of PMQs later. It was another desperate effort by Kemi Badenoch to cling to something which had meaning, but once again, she was simply going through a cycle of arranged questions that she delivered with the life force of an enema, and she's tried to differentiate herself from Nigel Farage. She can't differentiate herself from the leader of the opposition, from the government in any significant way, except to say that she is incompetent and they are competent. Her job is to expose the problems in the government. What she manages to do every time she opens her mouth is expose the problems in her own competence. And is there a difference between herself and Nigel Farage? Well, yeah. One of those two can at least string a sentence together that's coherent. Today she's been dismissing him as a reality TV star and deriding his populist appeal as a transient spectacle rather than a serious political farce. Serious political force, sorry. Yet, as the Reform Party eclipses the Conservatives in polling, the question looms, is Badenoch correct in her assessment? Or is she misreading the mood of the electorate? I'm only too happy to dismiss Farage, but, in an interview with The Telegraph today, she argued that the electorate shouldn't conflate political leadership with entertainment, stating that politics is not an episode of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Well, it was for Matt Hancock. While this is an attempt to, and it was for Nadine Dorries, while it's an attempt to diminish Farage's credibility, the argument is not without risks. The Reform leader, despite his polarising nature, has consistently demonstrated a keen ability to tap into voter discontent, particularly over immigration, Brexit, and what he frames as Westminster elitism. By outrightly dismissing him, Badenoch may be underestimating the degree to which Farage's anti-establishment rhetoric resonates with voters who feel abandoned by the mainstream parties. And if it's a choice between Farage and Badenoch, I don't think there's very much to choose from, is there? Why would you choose Badenoch? Moreover, the claim that Farage lacks substantive policies is not entirely accurate. While his political career has been defined by slogans and stunts, as indeed has the career of the leader of the Lib Dems, Reform's policy positions, particularly on net zero, migration, taxation, are all fairly well defined. It's Badenoch's policy decisions that are inadequate. And Badenoch's own rejection of the 2050 net zero target, a move she now frames as courageous realism, aligns her more with Farage than she might wish to admit. And that's her only policy position. And that she positions herself as a long-time sceptic while Reform has already made this shift raises the question, is she truly offering an alternative or merely arriving late at Farage's party? Badenoch dismissed the idea that the former Tory and Reform officials are engaged in a grand plot to merge forces, calling it wishful thinking. She pointed to the internal strife within Reform, particularly the loss of 20% of its MPs in a dispute over bullying negotiations, as evidence of its inherent instability. However, while Reform's internal squabbles are notable, they have yet to dent its rising popularity. The party continues to outpace the Conservatives in polling, suggesting that voters are more interested in its message than in its management. And they're less interested in what Badenoch's got to offer. Her argument also overlooks the deep fractures in the Conservative Party itself, fractures that she has helped to dig out. The Tories have spent much of the last decade embroiled in internal warfare over Brexit, leadership, ideological direction. And for Badenoch to criticise Reform for its inability while leading a party that has cycled through 5 prime ministers in 8 years is at best an irony lost on her, and at worst a failure to acknowledge the Conservatives' own crisis with managing its members. Badenoch's most significant policy announcement to date, her only policy announcement to date, her rejection of UK's net zero by 2050, by the 2050 commitment, is emblematic of her broader political gamble. She contends that the UK cannot afford to bankrupt itself over climate targets when it contributes just 1% of global emissions and remains at the mercy of Chinese dominance in renewable technology. She asked at the Prime Minister's question today what would happen if Britain met its zero net zero emissions target. Nothing would happen. But Keir Starmer ducked that answer. Well, I mean, he probably didn't have the details, the statistics to hand anyway. Why would anybody? This is a target, and it's quite a clever question, but futile when there are so many more important questions to be asking. And while this is a shift from conservative orthodoxy and from the stuff which Boris brought to the table, it's not without controversy. Critics argue that abandoning net zero risks alienating moderate voters, particularly younger generations who see climate change as non-negotiable. Yet this stance aligns her more closely with Farage's Reform Party than she's willing to admit. Farage has long positioned himself as a climate sceptic, dismissing net zero as an economic straitjacket. Badenoch, in her attempt to appear pragmatic rather than populist, may have stumbled into Farage's ideological territory. The key difference? Farage has been making this argument for years, while Badenoch has only just arrived, has only just started to articulate, and doesn't do it very well. She can't articulate anything. She can't get through a sentence without the notes in front of her. The most damning statistic for Badenoch is the Conservatives' polling position. And while the party languished at 21%, trailing Labour at 26% and Reform at 25%, her assurances that she is playing the long game sound more hopeful than realistic. The idea that the public simply needs time to warm up to her leadership ignores a fundamental problem. The Conservative brand is toxic after 14 years in government, and Badenoch's rebranding efforts are making no headway at all. She's not gaining any traction. She's not interesting enough to be a firebrand and to rebirth the Conservative Party after so much disaster. More than that, she is directly responsible for much of it. She was in that government. By contrast, Farage remains a political insurgent, untainted by direct government responsibility, unburdened by past failures. When there's been a failure, like Brexit, he walks away. While he may not be seen as conventional prime ministerial material, and I certainly hope he never gets to that point, he embodies the kind of disruptive force that appeals to an electorate exhausted by the status quo. He offers something where she offers nothing, and the notion that people will vote for a leader they respect rather than one they enjoy watching is noble in theory, but increasingly detached from political reality. People vote for somebody who has name recognition. Kemi Badenoch has some sort of name recognition, but only to people who want to mark out the disaster one after another. It's going to be a disaster, she said. Yeah, it is. And that's descriptive of who she is and what she offers. A disaster! A disaster! Kemi Badenoch's attempt to distance herself from Farage is understandable but flawed. In rejecting him outright, she may have failed to grasp why his appeal endures. While she champions pragmatism over showmanship, her policies often overlap with Reform's position. The real difference: Farage sells these ideas with conviction and flair. Badenoch struggles to articulate a vision compelling enough to even be heard. As the Conservatives slump in the polls, Badenoch's dismissal of Farage as a mere entertainer may come back to haunt her. Boris was an entertainer, and he at least had traction. Badenoch may think that Farage is simply a reality TV star, but right now, she's the one facing political elimination.